Hi everybody. So this tutorial is going to be on flowing water and particle layers. I was recently asked, can you do flowing water, can you animate flowing water on Moho? And the answer is yes, absolutely, you can. And here's how I did it. So I think step one really would be learning how to work with particle layers. I'm going to open up a new window here. So by default I have this vector layer, and we'll just use this layer to draw our shape for the particle. Let's also add a particle layer, which shows up as a folder, and we can just call this stream line 1 because we're going to do different kinds of stream lines. Let's go back to the other project here. As you can see, I used different colors of lines. So I got some lighter ones and some darker blue ones. Those will be different particles within the particle layer. Going back to the other project here. So if I select the vector layer, I'm going to want to put it inside the particle layer folder like that. And then keep the vector layer selected, and we'll start drawing our shapes. I'm assuming if you're learning how to do particle layers, you already know how to draw some basic shapes. So I'm going to draw this line. I'm going to go to the Create Shape button, and then I'm going to create this stroke. And there's my shape. It's just going to be a particle. It's going to be a particle line that gets multiplied through this particle folder. Let's actually make this shape a little darker so it's easier for you to see. So I'll go to a little darker blue here. So there's my shape, and that's going to serve as the shape for the particle layer, this one of the shapes of this particle layer. Now what you need to do is select your particle layer, and you can see it's got all these, it multiplies them, right? And then of course if you press play, it by default it has the particles already moving in a certain direction. Well, we need to fix that, and we want it to move in the direction that suits our flowing water. I like to open up the particle layer through the layer tab. So if you open up the layer tab, it goes to your general settings, but then you go to the particles tab within your layer, and it has all these different settings. And I will review these with you, and then you should be able to kind of understand how to use them to get it to work to your liking. So first of all, particles can be kind of difficult to work with. They don't really behave the way you expect them to behave, but once you learn all these properties, it should get easier for you to do. The first thing I like to do is I like to reduce all the numbers that are affecting this multiplication. I like to reduce them down to 0 or 1. This one on top here says particle count. Just so I can understand how my particles are going to move, I like to put this down to 1, and then I just hit apply, and then it gives me 1 particle. It makes it very simple to work with. So I have my 1 particle, and then it says particle preview particles. You can leave that at 1. It just shows how many you're going to see when you preview your animation. Lifetime 24, that's fine for now, and we'll adjust it later. The source width is where your particle is being generated from. It's how wide the area is going to be spitting out particles. The source height is the same thing except the other direction. It's how high the source is going to be, and then you have the source depth. I don't really mess with source depth a lot. Velocity is how fast your particles are going to move. Velocity spread is going to be basically variability in how fast your particles are moving. So some will move a little slower than the velocity, some will move a little faster, and then damping is how much you want it to slow down that velocity. And then down here, this is important too, you have the direction of your velocity here, and then you have the spread of the direction. That means some will go a little bit below the direction, some will go a little bit above or left or right, depending on where you have your direction set. Acceleration is how much your particles will speed up over time, and here's the rate. So you have the direction that they accelerate in, so your particles can change direction, and then this is how fast they will change direction. You'll notice that when you have the particle window selected, that the line changed its orientation when after I drew it, but the line that I drew in the vector layer is flat. Why is that? Well, it is kind of frustrating, but here's how you fix that. Over here on the right side, there is a little check mark that says orient particles. Well, we do not want the particle layer to reorient the drawing. So if you unclick that and apply, it'll stay flat. And that's what we want. What the particle layer is attempting to do with that button is it's orienting it in the direction, I keep closing this, but it's orienting in the direction of the setting you have for the direction down here, so up. So it's starting to lift the particle layer up and orient it in this direction. So we don't want to do that for this particular animation because we want to go from left to right for that top stream. You can kind of play with these settings, and I keep closing the window, but you can actually leave the window open as you play with these settings to get it how you want it to be. So I'll try to remember to do that from this point forward. I never set velocity down to 0. So velocity down to 0, velocity spread down to 0. This will just get everything to be stagnant so that way you can work from a stagnant position. This is the way I like to do it, but other animators might use the defaults better than I can. And then you press apply. That's all you have to do is press apply. And then leave the window open, press play to see how it's behaving now. It's just falling straight down now. Why is that? Well, the acceleration is still angled downward and it's at a rate of 4. So put that down to 0 and press apply. Now press play. And now you have a stagnant line. Well, it's kind of popping around a little bit. This is just showing you the various particles positions. It's spitting out this line at various positions in our source area. Which reminds me, we need to talk about the source area. So if I go back to, I'm going to close out of this for a second, but if I go back to the other animation here and I press play, you can see that the source area of here is, it's about as big as this beginning of the river over here. And so that's how big the source area should be. And notice it's going from left to right, so we don't need the source to have an opening vertically. It needs to have an opening so that they can be spit out left to right. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's go back to this window and let's open our particle layer again. And so the source height is how high. You see this blue line, it's very hard to see, but there's a blue line. I already set it. The defaults are 0.1. Let me put it back to 0.1 on the width and the height. If I do that, it gives me a little tiny, I'll zoom in here, a little tiny blue circle. But that blue circle is going to be too small to spit out as many particles I want at the mouth of the river. So what I need to do is I don't need any height or I don't need any width on it. If I go to 0 and I set the width to 0, you'll see that the line disappeared, and I believe that's because it is straight. It's become a straight line instead of a circle. Now if I set this, let's just put it up to 1 to say. There it is. So now I have this big vertical blue line. I don't know if you can see it, but it's going from top to bottom, a vertical blue line. That's the height of the source. And so it's going to be spitting them out from left to right. And I'll set that direction. So, but I don't need it spitting anything out vertically, so I can completely eliminate the source width. And you'll see how this is going to work in just a little bit. Okay, so now we have a lot of these settings the way we want them. If I press play, nothing happens except it shows you where it's being generated throughout this field, this source field. But now, if I press stop and you go to particle counts, let's say 10 particles now, and we'll change the preview to 10 as well so we can see 10. Press apply, and now you can see where they're all being generated at one time. So looking at our settings, I also forgot to change the direction spread to 0. We only need these particles going in one direction, and so I'm going to change that to 0 as well. But now let's change the direction to the right. So our field, the particle generation field, is about this high. It's going to start spitting them out from left to right. It probably won't yet. I'm going to hit apply until we give it some velocity. See, it's still doing the same thing. But I have the direction set. Now if I go back here and set the velocity to 1 and now press apply, you can see they've started to shift to the right. And if I press play, that's what I have. And that is basically how you set up your particles. There's one other thing that you need to know though, and you can animate how these shapes change over time. If I go to this streamline, I can make it grow. Oops. Let me pull up my timeline here. If I go to frame 24 and I want this to grow over time, over 24 frames, I can translate it and let's just make it get bigger. You can do that with your particles. So now if I go back to my, you can see that they start to grow as they move. So you can, kind of a cool laser effect, right? So play with that to see how you want your water to flow or whatever. You also don't have to use lines. You could use whatever else might be in the water, maybe like a bunch of bubbles. So for example, let's draw a circle instead. I'll give us a background to look at. Let me add one more vector layer here. And let's pull this outside the particle layer. All right, so we have that. Let's go back to our particle layer. Press play. So here's bubbles, right? But say I don't want it just to be one shape. You can do multiple shapes. So if I copy and paste this bubble, so you know how rivers and oceans, they develop these kind of sudsy clusters of bubbles. You could even do something like that. So instead of a line, maybe you have a cluster of bubbles. So now you have little floating bubbles. And then say you want more things than just the bubbles floating in the water, so maybe it's just some streamlines like we had before. Well, I called this one over here streamlines, but why don't we go ahead and just duplicate that. So now we have two vector layers within the particle layer. I'll call this one, well, I'll call this new one streamline. And let's rename the other one. We'll just call it stream suds. So let's go back to this one. Let's delete our bubbles. And then, I'm not at frame 0, am I? Okay, there we go. Back at frame 0. All right, now let's draw our lines. And now if I go back there, we have bubbles and lines. Looks good. Let's go back to the bubble one, the suds. Let's select all these shapes. There's got to be a faster way to do this. I'm not sure of it though. And let's just make those a little bit transparent at the beginning. This is fill. Maybe we'll take the stroke off. Let's just go to the fill and we'll change this alpha channel down here. So this will be kind of cool. Go back to our particle layer and now we have these nice streams and bubbles. That looks really cool. Anyways, let's take our background. This is our stream of water and we can bring it down, make it more narrow. So now we actually have a stream. So here's something to think about. Where is this starting? Well, we have it starting in the middle. The good thing you can move your particle layer, and we're going to just move it all the way to the left. So it's being generated at the very beginning of the stream. All right, so this is our stream. Looking pretty good. But you notice that they fall off right here. The way to fix that is in your particle layer, the particle tab, you go to lifetime frames. So we'll say frame, let's say 100 frames instead of 24. Hit apply. Now press play. And they go all the way across all the way across. So that's a simple, just a quick, simple tutorial on how you might animate moving water. You might have some other questions though. Perhaps if I go back to this animation here, If I go back to this one, you're like, oh, well, what about those ripples? They're moving like on a ripple. I can show you how to do that in just a second here. But also, how do they change direction to go down here? And what about this mist and then these ripples down here? Well, just to explain that real quick, the particles here, you can change directions using the acceleration, but you can't really change it on a dime like this. So I used a completely different particle layer that went down instead of horizontal. So this one I did vertical, and it's the same process. You just you can orient the source field. You can change to have the source width available rather than the source height. So you have a horizontal line. Here on this animation, it's kind of to the side to fit the artwork, and you can do that. You just have to play with the direction to get the particles to go how you want them to go. So I used a different particle layer to go vertically, up and down. I also used a particle layer for the mist, and I'll show you that, but there's not as much movement. Basically, there's less velocity. There's probably a little bit more velocity spread because I want them to be going, maybe not velocity spread, but direction spread, because I have some of the bubbles going down. They're going everywhere. So the direction spread is probably higher on this one. This isn't the setting for this animation, but for this animation, the direction spread would be higher. And then this ripple is the same thing. I just used a particle layer, and it just moves slow. It just moves slow. I only have like 5 particles that go very slow, using the same process I did in our little trial over here. But again, what about these ripples? This is a really cool effect that I figured out how to do with the Smart Mesh Warping tool in Moho. It's an excellent tool, and I'll show you how to use it. To do this, let's first just make invisible. Let's get out of this particle layer window. Let's make our particles invisible. This shape is what we're going to work with, and I want to add a few more points. And the reason we want more points is because it gives the mesh more opportunity to create these ripples. So here's our shape, but now we need to make our mesh. So first thing we're going to do is add another vector layer here, and let's call this mesh. If you go to your add point tool, basically you can make a mesh using 4 points or 3. So they have to be shapes of triangles or squares. So I just start to outline the entire river here that we have going. Once you have the mesh drawn, you can go to scripts. We need to fill the mesh. I think you could probably fill it manually by filling each square or filling the whole thing, I think. But the way I learned it is that you have to go to the drawing scripts and say fill quad mesh. Okay, so here's kind of the issue with the quad meshes. If you don't do it perfectly, it says that errors were found, so it can't read the mesh properly. So in that case, you have to do it again, and just be very careful about how you put things together. Okay, looks like it worked that time. So now I can animate this quad mesh. The only thing is I have to attach the other objects to it. So the stream and then the streamlines and the suds, which is awesome because you can totally do it. If you go to stream, double click your stream, go to vectors, and then down by smart warp layer, hit the drop down box, and then you can find your layer that you want to attach it to. So there's the mesh. Say OK. You can do that with your streamlines as well. So now these things are going to follow the way that I animate the quad mesh. You can see now if I add these layers back on here and I animate these points, it doesn't work at frame 0, but if you go to frame 1, you can see now it's warping all the images I made. So it's very cool. So go back to frame 0. Or frame 1 actually. I'm not going to do it too detailed just because this is a tutorial, but I'll just kind of do it quick. So these will go down a little bit. These will go up. All right, so that's the position there at frame 1. So let's go to frame, I don't know, 24 maybe. And let's reverse it. So there you go. See, now it's working. Now we don't want these to be sharp corners, so now I can change everything on my stream. They were probably sharp corners, but if I go to curvature, turn them to that. Now go to the quad mesh. Now it should have a little bit of curve to them when it moves. Yeah, it is better. So that quad mesh is making a little ripple. And that is just great. So now what we're going to do is cycle this quad mesh. I did not cycle appropriately. We need to go back to the original. So I'm going to copy frame 1, and that's what we want to do. So we want to cycle back. Now we can cycle back to frame 2. Cycle back, frame 2. That should give us what we're looking for. Yeah. So now we got a little ripple in there. And it's got our suds coming across our stream and the stream lines. So very cool. So that's how you do flowing water. That's what I have here. For these little bubbles that pop up at the edge of the waterfall, all I did is the same process. I used smaller shapes, and I velocity up and then acceleration down. Then I added another particle layer with vertical streamlines, and that's how I got the waterfall to go straight down. And then of course they're all being animated by the mesh to make the ripples. I had some static lines that I wanted to be part of the river here too, so some of them are static. Then this particle layer, the mist, also really easy to do. Here's my mist particles. So the direction is kind of straight up, a little bit to the right. Velocity is very slow. Velocity spread is very, very low. The direction spread I wanted high, and that's because I want these mists to be going in all directions, and so they kind of bubble out in all directions. Acceleration is 0. I don't really need them to accelerate at all. They just need to sort of grow. It's just one shape. What I did here is I just had the shape grow from very small, and then about a third of the way through, I start to change the transparency of that shape to where it disappears. And it grows the whole time. But the particle layer multiplies it. Going back in there to that particle layer, I have 100 particles, and it's going over, the lifetime is 100 frames. And the source width, I did kind of the same things that I did before. I changed it so that it would meet the line of the waterfall, the perpendicular line of the waterfall, and I rotated it. That's why the directions are a little bit weird here. This is actually going straight up because I rotated the layer. But when you press play, it looks great. So that's the mist. The ripples on the lake below is just the same process all over again, just a different shape. Anyway, that's the tutorial on particles and animating flowing water. Hope you liked the video. Give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment on what you liked about it, and if there's anything else you'd like to see in the future. Take care.